Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hi, I'm Becky Parker Geist, and I am the host of the Audiobook Connection podcast, Behind the Scenes with the Creative Teams. I am also president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association and the CEO of Pro Audio Voices, providing audiobook and podcast production, distribution, and marketing. And I am really excited to have with me today Dawna Markova, PhD, author of Wounded No More, A Woman's Journey to Reclaim Possibility. Dawna, welcome.
Thank you. I really am glad to be here.
Yeah. Tell us, if you will, a little bit about what inspired the writing of Wounded No More. When did you know that you had to tell this story in a book? And tell us about that inception.
The question for me that I heard you say, which was not what you said, was, when did I not know I needed to tell this story? And I started telling this story when I was 15. Probably no. I started telling this story when I was 6 or 7 or 8. And my father took the belt out of his pants, the brown leather belt with the brass buckle. And my mother he had just arrived home. She had put a scotch in his hand. He drank the scotch. And then my mother told him about all the bad things I had done that day. And then he started applying the belt and metal and buckle first to my rear end. And he said, "That was for your own good. Now you'll be a good girl, won't you?" So that's when it started. And I knew I had to tell someone, but who do you tell when you're 6 or 7? You tell your mother. You tell your father, you tell your sister. Well, my older sister had gone through the same thing herself. So she said, "Just don't think about it," which was my sister's way of relating to wounds. Don't think about it. So I knew after I was 15 and I had been raped, and I knew I had to tell the story. But who was I going to tell the story to? If I told the story to my father, he would have found the man and killed him. If I told the story to my mother, she would have said, "Just stop paying. Don't think about it. Don't think about it," which was, again, her answer to that, to most things. So I have always known I had to tell the story. I've written 21 books, and I have never told the story. And even now, as I begin to talk about it, which is different for me than writing it, I am aware, my heart beats a little faster. And that's different than writing about it. There's a certain distance I can create on the page. But I'm 82 now, and it's time to tell the story. And I knew that, and I didn't know how. And then I met a man who was a filmmaker, and he said this. He asked me about what was my meditational practice. And I said, well, I ask myself 3 questions every morning. And the questions are, what's unfinished for you to learn? What's unfinished for you to experience? And what's unfinished for you to give? And he said, those are wonderful questions. And I said, yeah, they are. And they're challenging questions. And I said, most of them by now, at my age, I can answer. But there is something when I ask the question, what's unfinished for me to give? I know there is one story more I need to tell. And I was born a storyteller. I'm sure my wails in the crib were stories that couldn't get out. It's just how my brain thinks. And I knew this was the story I had to tell. And I decided first I'd make sure that no one else had told the story. And of course, I couldn't tell my story, but, maybe there were other women that had written about being wounded. But what was pulling me was not the part about being wounded. What was pulling me was, yes, telling that story, but then telling the story that I couldn't find in any of the research I did. How do we reclaim a sense as women in particular, a sense of forward, a sense of future, a sense of dignity, a sense of possibility? And so I started doing research, which I also have been doing since I was 18. And I read one book after another, one website after another. I looked up, and all I could find was that women that had been wounded would tell of their woundings. Most of their books were of their woundings. And then some of them would tell about how they found someone else and they got married and lived happily ever after. That wasn't the story that I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell a story about reclaiming a sense of the possible, about crafting your life as if it were a work of art. A story that wasn't based on, and they live happily ever after, although I have. But that isn't where I was aiming. So the filmmaker, I told him the story over time, and then the movie industry went on strike. And then his wife got pregnant, and he said, I have to earn money. I'm going to be teaching. I don't know what he's doing. I'm going to be doing therapy with people. I think that's what he did. And then I said, okay, well, then I'll put it as a book, but I need to do it. It's unfinished for me. And the human mind hates what's called an incomplete gestalt. And so an incomplete gestalt is like if you hear a piece of music like da da da, and your mind will drive itself crazy waiting for the da 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 da, And and then I met you. That's really what was true. I spoke to a publisher who has published several of my other books, and she said, I think this is an audiobook, Dawna. People aren't reading memoirs anymore. There's lots of people that are writing them. And this is kind of a memoir of sorts, but people want to hear so they can cook dinner and hear the story. Nobody's sitting down and reading a memoir. And I knew that was true because I had so many people come up to me and say, oh, I bought I Will Not Die and Unlive Life, which was one of my books that did quite well. But I haven't read it yet. And I said, well, how long have you had it? And they said, about 5 or 6 years. I carry it around when we but if you would do it as an audiobook, I would listen. So, and that friend, Georgia Hughes, the publisher, said, I met this woman, Becky, who you would adore. And she does this thing with audiobooks. You should talk to her. And that is a very long story that brought me to you and to this moment.
Yeah. And how long ago, at what point did you meet the filmmaker? So how long was that? How long ago was that?
It's an interesting question because he is here now. I live in Maui and he came for a week to visit. The day
nice.
The rest of my family left, who were here for Thanksgiving, and he came to visit for whatever this time is. Anyway, so I met him about 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that you said about memoirs and audio, and especially a story that is so intimate in terms of the experience that this story is expressing. And I always think of audiobooks as a very intimate experience because most of us are listening with earbuds or headphones. We do sometimes have a speaker playing out into the room, but most of the time we're experiencing it in this very it's right in our head, right? It's right in our ears. And I think the very vibration of that physical vibration and the intimacy with which we listen makes those even more powerful, more easily taken in as well, I think.
I agree.
So as you were thinking about the audiobook process, what, before getting the recommendation, or even right after it before we met, what concerns, or were there any hesitations, or, what were you experiencing as you were thinking about getting your book into audio, but before having it, getting started on that process?
Well, my brain is giving me all the things I didn't think, like, I didn't think, I'm 82. Why am I doing that? That didn't enter my mind. I didn't think, can I do a book tour? That didn't enter my mind. I did have one other experience years ago with a company that does audiobooks, that did an audiobook of one of my books that I had written. And it was hard. It was such hard work. So I didn't know if I was up to doing such hard work. And it was my voice, but the story that I wanted to tell about this outrageous thing I did of taking a wounded me and a wounded 4-year-old boy and driving around the world, my voice now is not the same as my voice was then when I was 28 or 30 years old. My voice is different. It's changed. It has a lot more wisdom in it than it did then.
Yeah.
And there's a part in the beginning of the book where I was in the house I lived in with my husband in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and he had beat me up and beat up David and la la la. And I picked up, and I hadn't written very much at that point, and I picked up a pen and I picked up a piece of blank paper or a journal. I don't know what it was. And I wrote the following words with my non-dominant hand. I don't know why I wrote with my non-dominant hand. Well, I do actually, but I wrote the following words. A woman screamed. A woman screamed no. A woman screamed no into a world without illusion. The world smiled back. It hadn't heard a thing. And that was the beginning of my writing career. That was also the beginning, in fact, of this book. I didn't write, it was auditory. A woman screamed. The world hadn't heard a thing. And it feels even now, I get what they call in Hawaii chicken skin when I say the poem, because there are so many women screaming. And I was 28 then. And if you reverse the letters, I'm 82 now. And it's been a long and wonderful ride. And I know the world needs to hear the screams, but also the world needs to hear, in Latin America, they say, nunca más, no more. And then I've taught in South America, the time I'm thinking of, the women would stand up like this and just hold up their hands and say, in English, it would translate as, we have clean hands. Somos más. And now there are more of us. And clean hands to me is not only hands that don't abuse, but they're also hands that don't abuse ourselves, and hands. One of the greatest ways we can abuse ourselves is to abuse our imagination and abuse our sense of possibility. And if you had told me when I wrote that poem that I would drive around the world with a 4-year-old very battered child, as a very battered woman. And I would write magazine articles for 2 years, and I would travel 40 to 50,000 miles, and I would do it in a white Mercedes diesel. I would have told you, no, I'm a princess. I'm a Jewish princess. Women in my family don't go to the supermarket by themselves. They're always accompanied by someone else. I could never do that. And I did that. And then I wrote 21 books. So, and I got 2 PhDs, and I did a lot of other stuff. That was all, the other stuff was all possibility. Now, I have no idea what question you asked me. I hope I answered it.
Oh, you did. And let's just take a short pause, and then we'll come right back. Wounded No More. 1971, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Dawna, late 20s with bruises on her cheeks, paces in front of the desk of Margaret Harold, editor of New Woman magazine. She explains haltingly that she wants to write a monthly column entitled Alternate Lifestyle for a Wounded Housewife. It will track her adventure driving around the world with her 4-year-old son, David. Dawna was raised in Westchester County. The happily ever after, however, lasted only 6 years and ended in the emergency room of a Fort Lauderdale hospital with her bleeding internally. The prince, on a cocaine rampage, had beaten her up after she found him in bed with her best friend. He then stormed out of their castle, having written, "I want to be miserable, leave me alone," on all the windows and mirrors of their Fort Lauderdale home, drained their joint savings account, and driven off in her British racing green MG convertible. 3 weeks later, Dawna and David made their escape to the Miami airport, carrying everything they own in 2 backpacks, a metal camera case, and a shrunken blue blanket named Plinkily. At the American Airlines desk, she buys 2 one-way tickets to London, with no real itinerary except away from here. Thus begins an epic 2-year journey around the globe. The further Dawna travels from her old life and identity, the more she discovers who she really is as a woman, a mother, and a soul in wonder writing her own destiny. Each mile, the 2 travelers also learn more about one another, their relationship, and what it takes to survive through danger and upheaval in a strange and often complicated, beautiful world. They are confronted by sexism, racism, smallpox, apartheid, and bigotry. But this is really a universal story about how we lose ourselves, find ourselves, and can risk everything to live a life that feels truly possible. Get your copy today of Dawna Markova's Wounded No More on Amplify Audiobooks, the equitable audiobook platform. We were talking earlier about vibration, and one of the beautiful things that you and I had we talked about in our first conversation, or maybe the second, but we were talking about your husband's music. He's a composer, and incorporating that music into the audiobook. And I would love for you to share a little bit of like some thoughts about like what that means to you, and how that sort of some of the feelings that go with bringing this into life in this way. And yeah, let's just start there.
So it's interesting. When I was writing the manuscript for Wounded No More, I thought about Andy and I have been together for 40 years. We've known each other for 50. I despised him in the beginning because he used to wear open neck shirts with chest hair that would stick out. And he was a typical macho, Mr. Macho. I was teaching at Dartmouth College, and it's a small community because it's where I raised David, and I wanted him to be safe. And it's a very long story that's in some other book I've written. But anyway, at the end of Wounded No More, I talked about Andy and I coming together, and I said we were like unlived parentheses, because Andy is very quiet and he composes music, and that's how he speaks. And it's music for feelings that don't have words. And so in the 40 years, music has been his healing as storytelling has been mine. And it didn't seem possible to tell the story that I told, leaving either Andy out or leaving David out, since my son, because he was with me from on this particular book, starts when he's 4 and he's now 54. And David's beloved, who is, I call her my daughter in love, because I never had any other children and I adopted her because I always wanted a daughter. So they, at the end of Wounded No More, they came to be here with us in Maui. And David stepped into a gift he inherited from his father, who beat him up, but his father was very musical. And his father's whole family was very musical. And David avoided that the way that he avoided men. But as a way of reaching to communicate with Andy, David began to play music and he picked up the guitar. And so David and Andy would be in the living room on this last trip 2 weeks ago, and they would play music back and forth to each other. David would play the guitar and Andy would compose music. And it didn't seem possible to finish this book without including Andy's music, because for him, the things he could never speak, he too was wounded in his life growing up, and his father abused his sisters, and Andy couldn't speak it. He was the only boy in his family. So he just kept running away all the time, which is probably similar to I ran away. So often when it's this time of the year, Andy and I come together and a poem comes through me and Andy starts composing music to the poem. And then we send it out to our mailing list of 500 people as a thank you. Here we are together in Hawaii. They say our ohana. Ohana is a community. And so I couldn't do this project with you. I couldn't create an audiobook without Andy being in it, because he's so much part of the possibility that is what the story and the book is about. And the book has a possible ending, and Andy's music is for feelings that have no words. And my stories are for feelings that do have words. So we come together like unlived parentheses. And I hope that responds to your question, but that's what came out.
It does. Beautifully, beautifully. Thank you. Yeah. And let's talk just a little bit about the audiobook process. Additionally, we've talked a little bit now, but so we're still in the process right now at the time of this recording. And so let's talk a little bit about like the casting process, what that was like for you, hearing your story, your words coming through other voices. And, so talk to me a little bit about what that was like, and then how you found the voice that is the voice that's currently recording. Well,
since I had all those couple of decades ago, I think, since I had done one audiobook with a company, and I found it so exhausting, I expected that would be what this has been like. And this has been the other side of, like, if you take a seashell and you have one side that's here and you turn it over, then there's a side where there's a pearl embedded in it, if you're lucky. And this has been that side of it. It's been delicious. And it started we started with you, and then I was given the delicious choice of, 14 voices to listen to. And it happened as David and Angie were here for Thanksgiving. And so in the house is myself, 3 dogs, David, Angie, and Andy. And so I was given these little clips to listen to, and I immediately knew who was the person. But I went, how in the world? And I needed to hear both my voice and my son's voice. And that was what made it obvious, because it was, out of all those readers, there was only one that could do me at 28 and my son, and whose voice had to change from the beginning, where I was wounded, to me now. And David at the beginning was 4 and is 50 something 4 now. And that her voice needed to follow that whole arc. My first choice was you, because I fell in love with you when we had that first conversation. I said, yes. But I had these 3 other people. So we put little pieces of paper. We wrote our first choice and our second choice. And David, who's the mathematician among us all, said, well, the one voice we all agree on is this woman, young woman. I think she's young. I've never seen her. It's so weird. How could I have somebody?
It's how she sounds is what matters.
I know.
Right?
But my world is always visual first. Then it's auditory. My heart is auditory. My brain is visual first. So, but she was the one that could do them all. So she could do me, and she could do David, and she could hold in her voice David maturing from 4 at the beginning to 54 at the end, and Dawna in the beginning at 28, and Dawna at the end at 82. So there was no question.
That's beautiful. And I love how, and I want to highlight for our listeners that that you were clear on the qualities that were needed, and that progression through the book, through the audiobook. And by having auditions that included pieces of dialogue from you and David, and at both ends of that arc, provided you with the clarity that was needed. So I love that. Yeah, great. And I believe it's Sarah Smithton who's doing it, and she's absolutely lovely, and I know is doing a fantastic job. So I'm excited for that. And then let's see, I wanted to ask also about if so far in the process, thank you also for describing how this experience is turning out to be the pearl. I appreciate that. Is there anything other than that you feel like surprised you so far in the process? Anything that, another author might be interested to hear about because it was unexpected? Anything like that? Well,
what I know now is that I needed to work with someone. My life work has been about collaboration and neuroscience, and what do we have built into us that enables us to collaborate. And what became clear was how much bending and yielding I would have to do, but also I would have to teach. And for that, I say, for instance, there was this brilliant MD hypnotherapist, medical hypnotherapist that I studied with for 27 years, whose name was Dr. Milton Erickson. And I learned a huge amount with him and from him about this state of mind where the brain is producing mostly theta waves and alpha waves. And the best way I can explain it is if you're driving your car at night and you're at exit 34, and then suddenly you're at exit 38. And who was that masked person driving your car? And you were in a state of daydream, of wonder, of hypnosis, although I don't like that word because it's been so misused. So at the end of the book, to get back to Sarah, there is a reflection that I offered to the reader so the reader can integrate your brain at the end of learning something needs to wonder, well, what, and so what, and now what for me, having read this book. And what it does to do that is it begins to wonder, and it begins to go into a trance-like state. Well, I don't know how old Sarah is, but she ain't 82, and she didn't have the gift of studying with Milton Erickson. So when she read the reflection at the end, she read it like, and then I did this, and now I did this, and now and she, she didn't have that experience of what it's like to be in a state of daydream, of possibility. And it is one of the richest, it's a beautiful state of mind to be in. And when I was doing my neuroscience research, I would look at hundreds and hundreds of human brains and children's brains on this equipment. And it's like watching a rainbow. I mean, it's gorgeous to watch the brain do that. So where we are in the process now is I have to teach, quote, Sarah. She read the words beautifully, but she read them like this, as if it was reading a letter or a laundry list or a story. And she needs to go herself into that alpha theta daydream state in order to read it. Now, don't tell her, because I haven't told her yet. And I will tell her, and she and I will talk in the next few days. So that's I don't know if I'm answering your question at all, but that's in some way is the pearl, because she's giving me such a gift.
And it sounds like you're going to be giving her a gift as well in this process. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably clear, but I'm going to ask you the question anyway, because there might be more that you would like to share. But what would you like for your audiobook listeners, for the readers of your book? What impact would you like to have? How would you like the world to change as a result of this work?
That's such a big question. It feels like, where I live now, we have frequent rainstorms early in the morning, and sometimes after sunset. And then inevitably there is one or a double rainbow. And your question is that big. So
sorry.
I would like people that are listening to go from the kind of confused state of, well, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to think about that. That's over. To go from that, consider the possibility of going from that state to being able to ask themselves 3 questions and live in the question. What's unfinished for me to learn? What's unfinished for me to experience? And what's unfinished for me to give? And that will create in their brain that sense of possibility, that sense of rainbowness, that sense of wonder. Well, I wonder. I mean, I can't drive around the world in a Mercedes diesel with a kid. I can't do that. But what is it I want to give? What's unfinished for me to experience? I wonder. That I'd be really happy. That would be a legacy that I would really like to have happen as a result of hearing this collection of stories.
Beautiful. So beautiful. And I hope and look forward to hearing what your listeners respond, to. I expect that you will hear from them, and I'm excited for that and would love to hear more about, what you hear back. And would you share with our listeners what your website is so that they can follow more of, learn more about what you're doing, about your books, what's available to them?
Yes. And I have a poem I want to share that's at the end of the book. That's for you. Anybody else that's listening can eavesdrop, but it's for you, ma'am. So what you give to the world. And it begins, may you live a life you love. May you not belittle your mind or limit your heart. May you create calm in this wide moment. May you nest between a sky that lifts you and the earth that grounds you. May loving unfurl you and then give you away as a nest, a harbor, a garden. May life grow through you, so that which came to you and that which was created by you inspire those who will come after you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you can always find me at www.dawna, DawnaMarkova.com. It's very easy. And I would love it if you find me there, or if the listeners find me there, or if you and the listeners find me there.
Yes, indeed. And the audiobook, at the time that this goes live, will be available on Amplify Audiobooks, and we encourage you to get that there. Again, thank you, Dawna Markova, PhD, author of Wounded No More, A Woman's Journey to Reclaim Possibility. Dawna, thank you so much for spending this time with me. Always a gift.
In Hawaii, we say, mahalo nui loa. So may my thanks reverberate in you and be received by me. So mahalo nui loa. Yeah.
Could you say it one more time for me? So I want to try and repeat it back. And to you.
Perfectly.
Thank you, Dawna. Okay, great. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.